Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about the range function and what it's actually doing, and then we're going to talk about the syntax of for loops, and hopefully this will just give you a better understanding of what your code is actually doing. I think right now a lot of people feel like they're just typing stuff and they may not know exactly why they're typing stuff, and I just want to clear that up hopefully in this video. But I won't drone on about this forever. I'm not going to turn this into like a 3-hour lecture. We're just going to talk about it pretty quick. So anyway, so if you look at our first line of code here on line 11, it says that we're generating a range from 0 to 9, and we're not actually including 9 in this. So I want you to realize, like, oh, actually, sorry, this should be 10, because I've made it to 10 based on the variable name. So from 0 to 10, but 10 won't actually be included in the list that it generates. It will basically just generate a series of numbers from 0 to 9, and then it will get to 9 and it'll generate 9, and then it'll stop. When it gets to 10, it won't actually generate the 10. So it's still generating 10 numbers. It's just that it's starting from 0. If you want range to start from a different number, all you have to do is just give it a single positional argument before your end number, and that will tell it when you want to start the number from and when you want to stop from. And say you wanted to go from like 1 to 10, or let's say from 0 to 10. Actually, let's just make it easier on your brain here, and let's say 0 to 11. So this will be starting at 0, it'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then it will get to 11 and it'll stop. It won't actually generate 11. But let's say that we want to create a list of numbers from 0 to 10 that actually includes 10. And let's say we only want to do all the even numbers. So what we can also do is we can include a third value here, and that's what's known as the step, as you can see here. And the step means that it'll take it'll like skip every odd number essentially, basically. So by default the step is always 1, and I think if you try to put 0 as your step, it'll just error out because that doesn't make any sense. So anyway, but if you want to actually, if you want your range to start at 0, you don't have to put 0 here. You can just omit the first argument because it'll always start at 0 by default, unless you put another argument there. But if you give the range function 2 arguments, it knows that the first one is going to be the start and the stop. That's what's known as positional arguments. This function doesn't have keyword arguments. Okay, enough of the jargon terminology here. Let's just see what it actually produces. So let's ignore the for loop for now, and I want you to see what it actually produces. So the range function on its own doesn't actually produce any specific data type that we can really use. I mean, we can use it, but it's not really like an easily printable format. So let's convert it to a list. Now, we haven't talked about lists yet in this class, but you really don't need to know about lists just yet. I think we're going to cover it really, really soon, but you don't have to worry about lists just yet. So don't worry too much about them. Just think about it conceptually here. So I went ahead and converted it to a list so that we can see what it is when we print it out. So it's a little bit easier to see what the range function is actually doing. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. And I had it in debug mode, so you put these little breakpoints on here to do your debug run, and then you can just click this little continue button, and it'll go ahead and do that. So it just generated the range, and now it just converted it to a list, and we can see here that if we try to look at this, like if we try to, here, let me make this a little bigger for you guys. You can see that this doesn't really help. Like, we know that it's from 0 to 11. We know that it's a range from 0 to 11. Like, this doesn't help us. But if we look here, look at this. Well, we'll see it when we print it, so we won't bother looking at it in the debug window. But basically, right there is our range. And it went from 0 to 10, so it had the 11 in there. And then we can make it 0 to 9 or 0 to 10 or whatever we want. But, you know, either way, like that's basically what it's generating. So I want you to look at when you look at range, I want you to think of this. Even though it's not technically a list until you convert it to a list, that doesn't matter for Python. Like, I mean, it does in certain cases if you're trying to do list stuff, like list related stuff. But for the for loops, you can think of it like that, because that's basically what's going on in the background. If you're iterating through a range, it's kind of treating it like a list, basically. Okay, so now let's talk about for loops, and this will be really quick. I won't go on and on and on about this. But basically, when you write for something in something else, like literally for something in something else, what you're actually doing is you're saying for this variable, you're creating a new variable, first of all. So you're saying for this item in the something else list or some kind of sequence that it can iterate through, then do the following thing. And you can put in if statements here, conditionals. We haven't covered that just yet. I think we literally just started covering that this week. I can't remember. It's either this week or next week. But you can do all kinds of stuff inside of your loops. And I won't get into that because we haven't fully gone into that yet. And I'm not going to talk about something I don't need to talk about yet. But basically, you're saying for each thing, do that amount of tasks. Or if you have some kind of condition, then maybe only do it when you reach a certain condition. And you can iterate through strings, you can iterate through lists. This term here, something else, what this is actually called is, well, it's a variable, first of all, but what it's actually called is an iterable, which means that the thing that you're putting in here, something else, needs to be able to be iterated through it. What that means is there are certain variable types in Python that can't be iterated through. So, sorry, I had to move my mic for a second. So, for example, an integer can't be iterated through it. So if I say like example, whoops, put my caps lock on, example integer is equal to 10, I can't iterate through that. I mean, what does that even mean? Like the first number, like 1 and then 0? Okay, but I can't iterate through that in Python. If I wanted to iterate through each value, like each digit in the integer, I would first have to convert it to a string. So I would say like iterable int is equal to 10, or I could just say string of example integer. Either way, you can either use the string constructor function here or converter function, whatever you want to call it, whatever helps you remember it. I think they're literally called constructors, but I can't remember. But anyway, you can either use the constructor thingy, or you can put it in literals, like give a literal value, like 10 is a string literal, just like this is an integer literal. So you can either give the literal value, or you can take an existing variable and convert it. Depends on what you're trying to do. Don't get too caught up in when you should use variables or whatever. Don't worry about that. But I just want you to know that conceptually. So now if we convert it to a string, now we could go through it in a for loop, but we can't do that with a general integer. But I don't want you to worry too much about that. What I want you to focus on, though, the reason I say this is because what I want you to realize is that this means something. This something here means something. Like, I mean, literally, something means something. But, like, literally, it's important. Like, you're not just saying, like, I know we say, like, for I in range, for X in range, blah, 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 blah. But these are important terms. And so let me show you guys something a little bit more advanced that you haven't seen yet. So we will actually iterate through this. And for now, I'm just going to remove this for loop. We can actually just create a new one if we want pretty easily, so I'm not going to worry about it. But let's use the example here. Let's say example string is equal to word, okay? Now, what we're going to do, whoops, I have way too many blank lines here. We're going to say for letter in example string, print the letter. And actually, I think I want to use a different variable name for this, because it could be a character, it could be an exclamation point, it could be a number. So let's say for character, because we could put like another thing here. And if I were to say letter, it's not going to error out. It would still print every single character, but that's just not the most descriptive of what it's actually doing. So let's go ahead and say that. So print character. Notice we can use this. This is a variable. We can use this in the rest of our loop. Character. See, it pops up right there. So let's go ahead and run this code, and it's still going to print the list, but just ignore that for now. Actually, we can just comment that out so it's not as confusing when it prints out. So let's go ahead and remove our breakpoints here so we're not debugging at that point, and we'll just run the file. And now you'll see it's just going to print all the letters and all the exclamation points and everything, all the characters. And see, there you go. But I could just have made this letter and it wouldn't change anything about how the code runs. It's just whatever I want to call this variable. So like, for example, here, it did the same thing. See, it's literally the exact same output. It's just that I changed the name of what this variable is called. But changing the name doesn't change anything to do with how the variable actually works. So it doesn't matter if I use for I in string, for S in string, for X in string, for letter in string, doesn't matter. But all that matters is that you're consistent with it. Like, see here, it's saying character is not defined. Like, it's going to tell me this. If I try to run this code, it's going to say, okay, but character isn't defined. See? Because it's not the same as what it was. I have to be consistent with it. If I change that to an I need to use I here. That's all you need to know about that part of the for loop, okay? That's all I want you guys to realize, is that this is a variable that you can then use, and what this variable represents is it represents whatever the current thing that we're looking at in the loop is. So let me show you in debug mode what I mean, okay? So let's go ahead and go to debug mode, and I will show you exactly what I'm talking about, so we're not just talking out our butt here. So, all right, so look at this. So we're going to go to debug mode. So we have this range. Let's just actually, you know what? Hang on. Let's get rid of this because I don't want to throw too much information at you over here. So let's go ahead and debug this. So we just have these 3 lines of code in our entire Python script, okay? So notice we don't have any like variables that we've defined up here yet. So we're going to go ahead and execute this line where we defined this variable. Okay, so now we have this variable up here. It is defined and it is in our scope and we're working with it and it's up there and we're good. So let's go ahead and look at our for loop. So we're going to say for each letter in the string, or for each character in the string, for I, it's what I represents here is for each character. Let's go ahead and initiate this line. So now we've initiated our loop. Look what I is. It's W right there. I represents this. It's literally the same line of code as if I were to do this. That's what your for loop is doing every single time you're iterating through it. It's taking this, like whatever the thing is that you're looking at in the loop, and it's defining that to be this variable. And now we can do stuff with that. You can also use that to just do like multiple steps, like how you drew like a square using the turtle by making it do it 4 times by using the range function. It's literally the same thing. It's saying for I in range, then do that. So anyway, so if you don't use the I, then what's going to happen is, let's say I just print like hello here, and I just run this code again, then what's going to happen is it's not going to like completely ignore the I, but what it's going to do is it's just going to say, okay, I isn't being used, but we still need to go through the code and do this however many I's there are in the thing. So for example, we have, let's see, let's count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters. It's not really that hard to count, but I just wanted to show you exactly. We have 5 characters in this string. So this is going to print hello 5 times, and it's just going to keep going through it over and over and over, and I'm just kind of skipping just so we can see it for the sake of time. But it printed hello 5 times. Why did it do that? Well, it's because I equaled W at first, and it says for I in string. So what we're basically, okay, this gets kind of confusing, so it's kind of hard to explain this easily, to be honest with you. But basically what it's saying is, as long as I is defined, meaning as long as I can represent something that we haven't represented before, we're going to keep doing the following steps in the loop. Even if we don't use I in the loop, we're still going to keep doing that many steps as long as I is represented. So if this was like just W exclamation point, it would have only printed hello twice, because I is defined on the first iteration, it's W, and then on the second iteration, it's the exclamation point, and then on the third iteration, there's nothing, so it stops. That's all the range function is really doing. It's giving it a list of numbers that I can be defined as. So when you're saying for I in range, so let's go ahead and just remove this now, and let's uncomment all these lines. If you're on Windows, by the way, you can highlight all these lines and hit Control and then like the question mark, little slash there, and it undoes that. So let's get rid of our print function here for now, and let's say for I in range. Well, we don't have to do the range stuff because we already did that above, but we could say for I in the list, and we can also do range. It's perfectly fine, but let's say print I. So now what's going to happen is, let me show you exactly what this code is going to do before we even run it, or let me tell you rather. It's going to print 0 to 9 all the way down, kind of like it did hello, or like the word thing. It's going to print that all the way down. So let's go ahead and just run it normally, and there we go. See? And the reason I know that it's going to do that is because that's what I represents. I, on the first iteration, is, and let me show you this literally, this is basically like, we'll call it list2, which is a terrible variable name, but bear with me. This is literally, whoops, what your range is representing. So this is what that, like this is what these 2 lines generate right here. So your first iteration is saying, okay, I is 0, then I is 1, then I is 2, then I is 3, and you can kind of see it. It goes on from there. That's what your I represents. That's what this represents. So when you're saying for something in something else, what you're saying is for whatever the first thing is in the something else iterable item that we can iterate through, do the following line of code. And then as long as I is defined, we're going to keep doing lines of code. And you can make it like, let's say you wanted to iterate through like a list of numbers. Like, let's say you, okay, let me give you an actual example. Let's say we have a list of 100 numbers. And we only want to, I'm not going to write out 0 to 100. That's going to take forever. But let's say that we wanted to only print the numbers when they're divisible by 4. So what we could do is we could just give it a step here. So we could just say 0 to 100 and then 4. And that would work, you know, because then, well, it's going to print a crap ton here. But yeah, I mean, basically, I mean, it stops at 100. So maybe we should have done 104 technically. But yeah, we could just do that. Another way that we could do it is we could use conditional statements. And so we're not going to get into that too much, but basically you would just say like, if I%4 is equal to 0, then print I. And then now we could do the exact same thing without the step, and it should print the same except with 100 this time. And then there you go. That's what the modulus operator is. That's what this little % sign says. It says if the remainder, if you divide I by 4 and the remainder is 0, then let's print I. That's all the conditionals are. We haven't really gone into conditionals yet, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, and I don't expect you guys to know this just yet, but I just wanted to show you, you don't necessarily have to do everything. Like the loop doesn't have to do as many steps as there are in the range, or as long as I is defined. You can tell it certain conditions on when to act and when not to act. So it's not necessarily that just because you made a range that goes all the way to 1,000,000 that your code is going to iterate 1,000,000 times. I mean, it will actually check it every single iteration from 0 to 1,000,000. Like there, it was checking to see if I was divisible by 4 with every number. It was just doing it so fast that it looked like it was instant, but it literally was going one by one. So it's still going to try to iterate through all those numbers. It's just that it won't actually do anything. Like it didn't actually print to the console unless that condition was met. So you could actually make your range or whatever you're iterating through really big, and it won't necessarily go through it. Like it'll go through it on the, you know, on this part, but it won't necessarily do all this stuff unless it meets the conditions that you require. But that's how, anyway, I just wanted to go over that pretty quick. I mean, I know I said it would be a quick video and it's almost like 20 minutes, but I just wanted to really comprehensively cover this topic, because when you're starting to get into things like iterating through lists of things or numbers of things, I mean, you know, it makes it a lot more simple. And we're actually going to talk about something soon, and I want to go ahead and talk about this really, really quick, and it's the last thing I'll talk about. But let's say that, let's just change this back to 10, first of all. Actually, let's change this to 5. That's what we'll do. And we'll just get rid of the step there, because it always starts at, or the start, because it always starts at 0. So let's say that we have our example string again, and, whoops. Okay, so we got 5 characters in this list, or in this list of characters, I mean, in the string, right? So let's just say, let's use the length function here, and let's see how big this string is. It should give us 5, but let's go ahead and use this. So, whoops, that's not what I wanted. There we go. So let's just go ahead and remove this for loop for now, and I'll show you what I mean. So it should print out 5 here. And it did. So we know that our string of characters here is 5. Here's the thing. This is a variable. We could have changed this. At any point in this code, we could have said example string is equal to that, but it's also going to be equal to word is fun or something. I don't know. So I guess it should be words are fun or whatever. But, you know, we could keep changing this variable. But here's the thing. With this link function, we can just keep seeing what this string is. See, now it's 14 characters with that line of code. And now if I run it again, it should just be 5 again. So we can use the length function to get however big this string is. Why is that important? Why does that matter for range? Well, take a look at this. What we can do is we can set a range value that's equal to whatever the length is of this string. And now what we can do is we can iterate through a list of numbers that represents, it's kind of mapped to this string. So let me show you exactly what that would look like. I shouldn't use the word list here. List of string numbers. Not a terrible variable name, but also not great either. So this is what that's going to do. Whoops, I skipped a number. I swear I went to kindergarten, guys, I promise. Okay, so we have 5 characters here, right? So what this is going to do is the length function is going to generate the number 5. Okay, you with me so far? Got it. So what range is going to do is if we pass our range, sorry, if we pass our length value of that into the range function, we're basically saying range, like, actually, let me do it underneath this line so it's a little clearer. So what this line represents right here on line 18, what this line represents is it's the same thing as me saying range 5. But we could also add to this string again. We could do like how I did before where I said like word is fun or whatever. And that would make this 14. So now this range is going to be 14. So it would be like this. And just imagine this goes all the way to like 13 instead of 4. And that would be the same thing, right? So here's why that's important. If we say, let me get rid of this for a second. Actually, I shouldn't have done that because I'm going to use it. If we say for I in range length string, print I. What this code is going to do is it's going to set I equal to 0. And then it's going to set I equal to 1, and then it's going to set I equal to 2, and then 3, and then 4, and so on. And it doesn't matter how big I make this string. I could keep adding to it. I could say plus is, and then I could say that, and I think that's like an extra, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, an extra 4 characters. So this would be all the way up to, let's see, that's 9. It would be up to 8. So it would be 0 to 8. So just imagine this is like, well, you don't have to imagine, I can just do it real quick. So now it's like that. That's what this is doing. It basically just imagine like a list in your mind, and it's just generating a list of numbers. And now it's saying, okay, so now instead of being word, it's going to be word is. And so we're going to say when we're on our first iteration, I is going to be equal to 0. And then I is going to be equal to 1, and then I is going to be equal to 2, and then I is going to be equal to 3. And I can show you that right here. See, notice we're not even using this variable anywhere in our code. We can comment it out and it runs perfectly fine. We're also not using this one either. But see, we're literally just using these 2 variables right here, this and this. And you could set this part equal to its own variable, by the way. You could totally do that. And then you could just say for I in our list of numbers. If that makes you... If you want to save that to a variable, you don't have to, but if that helps you understand it, like, let me show you what I mean. If you were to do that, you could say like, well, yeah, let's just use this variable. We already have it. Let's just use it. So we could do that. And then, oh, I said that, but I just used the same. There we go. Hang on. List of string numbers. There we go. Let me actually use the variable. Okay. So we could do that. See, now your code is a little bit more readable. And then, you know, we'll just keep the I as it is for now since I already have it down there. But basically, that's what it's going to do. So now it's just going to print the numbers. See, it printed 0 to 8 exactly as I said it would. So let's just undo that change real quick because I want to bring our number list back. There we go. So again, same thing. It's not actually going to use this list, and it's going to be the exact same code. See, and that was the list right there. It's going there and it's printing. It says, okay, print 0, print 1, print 2, print 3. But we could also traverse the string by the index too. And this is the very last thing I'll talk about. I know I said this would be the last thing would be the last thing, but this is the final last thing and then I'm done. I'm done talking about this. But we could also index the string. So we can do this thing called indexing where the first character in our string is going to be word. And let's just go back to our original because I think that's a little bit easier to visualize what's going on. So let's just cut this crap out of here. Okay, so we could say, for example, just go with me here. So our example string is equal to word, right? But what if we say W is equal to, actually, hang on. Let's call it substring. I think that's going to be easier to understand. So we could say that substring is going to be equal to example string. And we're going to put little brackets here. And now we need to pass in a number. So we're going to pass in 0. So what's going to happen is if we print out the substring, whoops, Whoopsie daisy. That's not what we wanted. If we print the substring here, and let's just go ahead and comment out our for loop for now, then it should print W. Right there. See it? Right there. Printed W. So basically what we can do with this information is we can index the string. We could access any letter in this string or any character or whatever. We can access anything in this string as long as we know its index. So we could say W, or sorry, we could say 0 would be W, and then 1 would be 0, or O rather, and then 2 would be R, 3 would be D, and 4 would be exclamation point, right? So with this knowledge, here's what we can do. This is why traversing by index is what we're calling it. That's what the I really kind of stands for here. What we can do with this information is not only can we say print I, but we can also print what its value would be in the word. So let's make this a fancy little thing here. Let's make a little fancy formatted string here, and let's print out what our index would be, what our index letter would be in the string. So let's say example string I. Here we go. And if you want, you can save this to a variable. So let's do that real quick. And I'll just make that, because I think that makes it a little bit easier to see what's happening. So let's change our I to index. Let's make it an actual like letter here, or an actual word, I mean, rather. And let's just change this to index for now, because we're actually still going to use this line of code, but we're going to cut it out of here. So let's cut it. Let's make this a variable, and let's say current character in string is going to be equal to that. And now let's go ahead and print it. Current character equal to string. Okay. So now if we run this line of code, if we just run this block of code, this whole thing basically, let's just remove the range function. We're done using it for now. So now if we run this, watch what happens. It's going to print every single index value and what its corresponding character is in the string that it's referencing. So this is what traversing by index is. Now, I guess there is one last thing I'll show you, and that will be the final last thing. I freaking promise you, because I guess I'm done talking about this stuff. So we can also traverse by the element in the string too. So we could say for element in example string, print the element. And so it's basically the same thing. Let's just use a different word. It is traversing by element, and that does kind of help you understand what's going on. But I think character makes a little more sense as a variable name. So let's go ahead and print that, and it should just print WRD exclamation point. See, that's essentially what I'm talking about. Like, this is, in this example, you're traversing by the specific character, but we can't necessarily get its index. There are ways in which we could get its index, but they're not 100% reliable in some of those ways. So sometimes it's really good to have the index when you're traversing by anything. If you're traversing through an iterable item like a string or a list or something, sometimes it is really handy to have the index. That's why we do the for I in range length, whatever. But if you just want to go through each specific item and you don't necessarily care where it is, and you just want to say like, okay, every time I see a W, I want to print it out to the console. I don't even care where the W is. I just want to print all the W's. Then in that case, traversing by element here kind of makes a little more sense. Although that's a very niche case, but you can think of other cases where you would want to use it as you're programming. But, you know, either way, it's really good to know both methods, I think. But anyway, that's what a for loop is doing, and that's indexes and string indexing and all that. So, yeah, I really hope that helps explain what's actually going on. And if you need further help, please just comment or message me or whatever. I don't know. Email me. I don't care. However you need to fly to my house, knock on my door, come in. I don't know. Whatever you need to do. But anyway, okay. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for watching, and take care. Bye.